Okay, well, I told you we have a special announcement. Are you ready? Okay, it's actually going to be, this is going to take a little bit while because there's a lot going on. We've been saying that God's still moving in the midst of a global pandemic. This is New Frontier here. And God spoke that word over our church at the beginning of this year, that 2020 was going to be a year of new frontiers. And we've already been seeing that with our online ministry. Our theology podcast has reached, as of this weekend, 20,000 subscribers. We've seen our Facebook groups got expanded to 500 people across Dallas, Fort Worth. We're reaching and touching lives online, but also right here. And so there are some transitions taking place with a few staff members. And so first, I want to call up David and his bride to be, Allie. Come on up, David. David and Allie got engaged in June of this year, and they're to be married on November 1st of this year. Okay, so were you just showing goosebumps? Oh, time, okay, yeah. I was like, you're just keeping me on track. Okay, I'll keep it short. I'm going to skip all the praise, and we're just going to go straight to business. No, I can't. David has been amazing, and he's been our youth pastor for over 2 years now, and it was just so providential the way the Lord dropped him in our lap. And David was in my youth ministry when I was a youth pastor, and just his heart of worship and his heart for the presence of the Lord I was in the youth group. I was at the youth group meeting on Wednesday night, and that passion for the presence of the Lord, where it is today and where it was when you started, you've imparted that. And I hear stories of the discipleship, and I hear stories of just the fruitfulness of your ministry with the youth. And so, David, we're super thankful for what you have done. So David's transition, kind of here's where he's at. So David feels called into ministry. First of all, we ordained him as a pastor in February of this year. David feels called to Wellspring, and we're thankful for that because we believe David is called into ministry and to Wellspring. At the same time, there are some big transitions happening in David's life right now, and one of them standing right next to him. But between getting engaged this year and soon to be married, David's a business owner on the side. I don't know how he does it, but he started a coffee shop this year. And this last 6-8 months has been just, David has just been really stretched thin. And so he started the conversation with me this summer of like, something's going to have to give in my schedule for me to be the husband that I'm called to be, and to enter into this next season well, and to give in ministry what I'm called and need to be able to give. I want to be able to do that well. And so everything was on the table for him at that point. And so after praying and processing, it became clear about mid-August or so, like that transition is now. And we knew there would eventually be a transition. We could kind of sense that. We've been talking about it, but we thought it'd be well down the road. But it's upon us. And so David is no longer going to be our youth and young adults pastor, as he's been. I didn't even talk about your role as young adults pastor, but there's so much that could be said there, and your discipleship and so on. But David's not going to be operating in that capacity. He's going to be our small groups pastor, okay? He's going to be our small groups pastor. And so this fits a number of things. First of all, it is a passion. Discipleship is a passion of David's, and this really fits well with that role. Also, from just kind of hours and time perspective, it's more agreeable to what he can do. He is going to be diminishing some hours with us, but putting focus on the small groups area. This is going to be kind of a transition. It's going to be less like the pushing of a button and more like the handing off of a baton, and I'll tell you in a few moments kind of who that baton will go to. But anyway, that's the role that David is going to fill in this season. The young adults role, here's what I would just say. The young adult program will not officially have a paid staff member overseeing it, but young adult people will continue to be invested in strongly. David continues to have a passion for young adults. And teenagers, you can be thankful that David's not like going off to Timbuktu. David is going to be around, but we and he feel as though small groups is what's going to really fit him in this season, and it's also going to fit our church. We're always talking about friendship, relationship, and you just heard me talking about it a few moments ago. This is like our big thing, friendship with God and each other, and extending those two friendships to the world around us. The vehicle for everything is relationship, and small groups are one of the biggest ways that we do that. David has just tons of vision for that, and so far, and I just want to give a shout out to our elder, Douglas Coco, over here. Doug has been overseeing our small groups in a volunteer capacity for some time, and he's done a fantastic job. I mean, it has been amazing. But Doug will tell you it's really ideally more than a volunteer role, and Doug just happens to be a highly committed volunteer, and so Doug is relieved by this. No, but it's a special and important moment for our church to be able to enter into that new frontier. We believe you're going to be a big part of it, and we're so excited, Allie, for you to be part of this journey as well. Allie is a rock star, so yeah. Okay, now I'd like to call up Stacy. Come on up, Stacy. There is also a transition taking place here, and so... Yeah, right there. Okay, so there's also a transition taking place here with Stacy, and part of that transition relates to gift and calling, and part of that relates to timing and season. Okay, when it comes to gift and calling, you just saw it on display, right? She is musically, top notch. Just shout an instrument name, she knows how to play it. Banjo, got it. Mandolin, got it. Keys, drums, she's got it all. She is musically crazy talented. More importantly, she has the right heart. She loves Jesus, and she and I have worked closely together. In fact, we've got all this like youth group action going on when I was a youth pastor some years ago. It's been forever since I was a youth pastor. 2010, I guess, was my last year. Anyway, but she was in my youth group too. And so we are big in this church on discipleship and investing and pouring into people's lives and developing them. And so she was part of the worship team back then and has continued. And so we recognize fully that, one, she's got the right heart. Two, she's crazy, musically talented. And three, she feels called to Wellspring, and we're so thankful that she does because we want her to continue in her role at Wellspring. At the same time, there are aspects of her sort of job description, if you will, that aren't necessarily in her primary wheelhouse, okay? And everybody's got a wheelhouse. Like, we're called the body of Christ. Like, not any one of you is the whole body, right? Like, and so for Stacy, what she thrives in are some of the things I described, and also just kind of communication, the organization side, and all of that. She's very good at. But our longtime vision has been that. And I say this all the time to Stacy and everybody, that we're never looking for, like, hey, this person's going to be Wellspring's lead singer. Like, we're looking at raising up a collective of artists, of musicians and lead singers, so that when you come in on any given Sunday, you don't necessarily know who's going to be leading, who's going to be singing, who's going to be on the stage, because we want to be a training and equipping church. We want to raise up musicians, and we want to make use of your gifts, and there are gifts out there in the congregation. This involves lots of strategy and recruiting and department building and pastoring. And when it comes to that sort of department building, visioneering side of things, that's not so much in Stacy's wheelhouse. And so about August last year, she and I started to talk about this. Like, hey, I want you to thrive in your lane, in your area, but it might be that we need to pull somebody in to help you in this area. She totally agreed and totally welcomed that, and felt like that would be a lot of pressure off of her to just to be able to focus on what she's great at, but to have somebody to come in and kind of take the department building, visioneering, leadership, and pastoring side of things. And so we began that conversation a year ago, and we're not hasty here. The scripture says, don't lay hands on anyone too hastily. And so we've been kind of searching for quite a while, like who would that person be that we could maybe pair with Stacy, where we were envisioning someone as maybe sort of like a worship pastor and Stacy as worship director, and it operates as sort of this partnership, but with this person taking more of the kind of oversight pastoral leadership responsibility. And so we started kind of walking down that road and very open in conversation with Stacy all throughout that process, affirming her and her gifts and what she's doing. And so that brings us to about January of this year. And so in January of this year, we met somebody. And I want to introduce you to this person. But before I do, I just want to one more time tell you how incredible of a person this is that's next to me. Stacy has been incredibly teachable along the way. Anytime that I meet with her, which is every week, she has her notebook out and she's writing down everything. And then the next week, it's part of her, she's organized. And the next week, we're talking about, how she's applied those lessons and all of that. And so you've been awesome, Stacy. And so we're thankful that you're staying with us and continuing in an important role. Oh gosh, before I announce the next person, there's a whole other dimension to this that I almost didn't mention. Okay, when COVID hit, this brought about the timing season dimension of what I talked about. I talked about gift and calling. Okay, so timing and season. I would say COVID was a pretty big change for us, wouldn't you? Well, if it wasn't for Stacy, it would have been very hard, if not impossible, for us to make the transition where we did this big online service just right before this service, and it has been top-notch. I mean, people would think that we had like mega church resources to be able to pull off what we're doing. That's Stacy. And so the video and the online component, her hours have kind of gone through the roof on that side since March. And so really what we want to do is we want to recognize, for us to enter into our new frontier, we actually need Stacy to keep doing that. And so her new title, she's, instead of just worship director, she's worship and video director. She's going to keep doing that, but we're going to acknowledge that, and that's going to become a major facet of what she does. So, Stacy, thank you so much. Okay. All right. Now, if you couldn't discern by the person standing in the very back of the room who that next person is, Nathan, why don't you and Megan and your 3 delightful young children come on up on the stage? Yeah, just right front and center. Okay. Well, guys, this is Nathan's family, and I'm trying to get where you guys can see everybody. But I want to tell you guys a little bit of the story here and how this has happened. Okay. First of all, even before the story, what I'll tell you is this: Nathan is going to be our full-time youth and worship pastor. Okay, full-time youth and worship pastor. We feel incredibly excited and blessed about this, and once again, God's hand has been all over it. I first came in contact with Nathan in 2018, and then in 2020 of this year, kind of a few months down the road of having that initial conversation with Stacy, I reached out to Nathan. He just kind of came to mind and just said, "Hey, might you be interested in this?" Well, here's kind of Nathan's story and situation, okay? So Nathan has been a church planter for 10 years, and he was one of the founding church planters of a church in Denton called C3, and he was their lead worship pastor. And what we talked about, raising up musicians, raising up lead singers, that has been his thing. And, at UNT, this big arts school, they did have a lot of supply, and so he pulled all these people in, and they had just this incredible rotation. And so that's what he's been doing for 10 years. Worship has been his thing, and specifically raising up teams, leading, pastoring has been his thing. And he's clearly got a lot of grit, because I don't know if you knew this, but church planting isn't easy. And so to do that for 10 years, and they took a church from infancy to about the size of Wellspring. And so he's been doing that at the same time as being a full-time English teacher at a private Christian school, at the same time as being a fine arts overseer for that Christian school. So he's been around teenagers for a decade. He's had leadership oversight positions for a decade, but originally we weren't looking for a youth pastor, and we just reached out to him for the worship role. And we went through 2 months of interviews with different elders, and by the time we got to March, we were just about ready to push the button or pull the trigger or whatever, and then COVID. And so we pushed the pause button instead, and he was in a position where he could push pause. And so we just pushed pause. We wanted to see what was going to happen with finances. We wanted to see what was going to happen with church gatherings. Nobody knew anything that was going to happen. And so that was March, and now we're in September. And we can look back at God's providential hand. He has continued to provide the finances all throughout that season. We've remained in a stable place. We were in a great place already, and we continue to be in a great place. And so we've had all that time. We've also had a lot more time, and you usually don't get this when you hire somebody, but a lot of time to kind of interact with Nathan over that period of time as they made the shift over in June and actually joined Wellspring and have been coming here for some time. And so we've had that opportunity as well. And so August rolls around, and we're like, okay, we're ready to hire you as the worship pastor. Come on, baby, let's do this. And then David has a conversation with me. And I'm like, oh, man, what is happening in my life right now? And so I'm like, and so we realized this transition could be bigger than what we thought. And so I floated the idea to Nathan, have you ever considered being a youth pastor before? And he started laughing. And the reason he started laughing was because he told me a story. He said a year ago, I was on a prayer retreat, and I was seeking the Lord, and I have it written down in my journal. I felt like the Lord told me, one day you're going to be a youth and worship pastor. He says, the very next week, the elders of my church call me in and say, would you like to be our youth and worship pastor? I was floored. Yay, I can hear the Lord. How wonderful, how delightful. But as it sometimes happens, the plans did not come to fruition, and the elders didn't quite pull the trigger. It was their desire, but it just didn't happen. And so Nathan concluded, maybe he doesn't hear the Lord. No, he didn't. But then when I asked that whole sequence of events in his life kind of came back into fruition. But I tell you that because we see God's hand in this. And I tell you this because it wasn't just a convenient place like, well, you're here, you want to do youth also? We're talking about a guy who's been investing for 10 years into youth and has previously already felt a calling into youth ministry. We feel especially privileged as a church to be in a position where we can have somebody full-time dedicated to youth and worship. I think our teenagers are going to benefit from that. I think our worship ministry is going to benefit from that. And so Nathan and Megan and crew, we are so thankful and excited to bring you guys on board, and all of you, we're excited about what God's doing.